Hey, hey, and welcome to the Voices of Survivors with Kathryn Moody. If you're just tuning in, I am Kathryn and a single mama of two. I have been through like so much throughout my life, and like going from having trauma in my childhood, codependency, and then an abusive relationship that ended with gaslighting, emotional abuse, verging on sexual abuse with like the guilt tripping, because that's what the good wife does, and just the whole 9 yards, especially dealing with healing and actually coming to terms with being a codependent, because that in itself has like so many toxic traits, because we pick up things along the way with narcissists and we learn those behaviors to survive, but then they don't really serve us once we're like out of that situation and in the real world and wanting to have healthy relationships. So I'm super excited to have this podcast and share a light and give a voice to those survivors who have gotten out and are ready to share their story and give value and hope to those who are still stuck in that situation. So today I have the gorgeous Sabre with me, and I'm super excited for her to share her story. So Sabre, what was your experience with abuse?
Thank you so much, Kathryn, for bringing me on today. And I really, really appreciate the intention and the message of this podcast because I feel like, sorry, my cat is like moved into a new place. My cat is like being best friends with my housemate's cat. So if you hear a little bit of noise in the background, they're okay. We'll for this conversation. But what I wanted to
Great.
share was that I feel like the story is really, really important to share because that was actually a really big part of my journey is to actually listen to other people's stories. And when we hear, people who go through things where we can really resonate and feel that me too connection with them, when we see people who have a way to really rise like the phoenix, right, is what I usually talk about it like, then we can really bring a lot of solutions into our own lives and a lot more empowerment for our current situations or circumstances that we may be in. So I just wanted to just thank you for the intention and the mission of this podcast here, and thank you for bringing me on. And
Yeah.
so let's see. I come from a very colorful background of many, many layers and layers of trauma, but basically I grew up with, a single mom in poverty. I was conceived in a rehab. My mom and dad had met in a rehab, and then they got kicked out of the rehab, and they were really trying to hold it together sober. My dad went off and, you know, couldn't make it happen. There was a lot of like really intense energy. My mom was a really intense person. And there's a lot of stories about how that went down. I don't really know, but basically, he ended up leaving and not staying sober. But my mom actually stayed sober for quite a long time, for the first 12 years. She was sober for 12 years, me being alive, but she was really struggling through the whole thing. We were really being supported by her mom and her dad, which is my grandma and my grandpa. And um, my mom was just the epiphany of someone who had unresolved trauma, very much so. She could do so many things. She could literally build a house. She could build a computer. She could work on cars. She could sing like an angel, play every musical instrument you could ever think of. She was an incredible artist. She was gorgeous. She was a bodybuilder. Like the list goes on and on and on about what a woman could do. She was kind of a freaky prodigy child, to be honest, but also had such a hard time with addiction. She also had many layers of massive physical abuse and, like just real deep stuff. Like I guess my grandpa would actually like take her head and like bash it in holes in the walls and just, like be really, really just big physical trauma and sexual trauma from, when she ran away and was trying to meander with men around on the streets and things like that as a teenager. So she carried that with her, right? So she was really struggling. It was all unresolved stuff, you know. She was baptized by 30 different friggin' religions. I have no idea. There's different churches, so many paths she was really trying to like heal and grow, you know. So I watched her do this and I listened to her path, and it was just it was very difficult to be around her a lot, because she also would pass down some of those physical and emotional and, you know, the gaslighting, abuse, all that kind of stuff to me as a child. And it was pretty standard and normal. Like, that was kind of just my regular life growing up. We would get in really, really intense fights, really, really intense fights. And it wasn't until one day where I finally, the neighbors had called the cops one too many times, and then they ended up taking her into jail, and then I went into foster care. I had found out I was in foster care when I was a baby. Anyway, so the list goes on and on, right? This is a very layered story of when I got into foster care. I was 12 years old at that time. So then my teenage years, I grew up in foster care. And then even from there, I bounced around to 14 different homes. My mom had relapsed. She actually passed from an overdose right before I turned 16. Yeah. And I was bouncing around from foster care. I had done my own addiction as well. I had fell into that sometime when I had ran away from one of my many foster homes. And I was just so grateful that I landed in this particular foster home who would just let me do whatever I wanted finally, instead of restricting me. That's kind of what I found with foster care was they would give me all of these medications and tell me I'm this and I'm that, bipolar and blah, 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 and not let me see my mom or call her, or any of these things, right? Or pierce myself, or like, you know, have colored hair. And I just felt so restricted that I just wanted to rebel all over the place. And that's why I kept running away and getting into trouble and all these things. Finally, I landed in a woman's home where she was kind of a pushover, but I was honestly, that's exactly what I needed at the time. I needed someone to just not tell me no. And when I was given choice, I started making better choices for myself. Wouldn't you know? That was very interesting, right? And that was actually when I was living with that woman, was when my mom passed. And I was about a few months sober, actually, from my own addiction that I had fell into. And there were so many layers of trauma within that experience as well. I was on amphetamines. I actually got tricked into it, and it was, you know, a lifelong neighbor of mine. So there was lots of sticky stuff that I had encountered and experienced. But when my mom passed, something in me, I could have gone and relapsed. I was like 2 months sober. 2 months sober, and I was in this foster home where she was telling me, you know, can I go to this party? Yes. Will you buy me alcohol? Yes. It's like, will you buy me cigarettes? Yes. So I have very easily just continued to do this cycle and repeat it. But man, like, I saw my mom really try so many things. And there was a lot of signs that may have pointed to there's no freaking hope. You know, people can't heal, blah, 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 all these stories. I don't know what exactly switched in me, but I knew somewhere in me I really wanted to create a different life. So I started making art. I started learning how to dance. All of these things my mom loved to do, and she always wanted me to do, but you know, we had such an interesting relationship. Anything you do, I don't want to do. But then all of a sudden, like, I want to do all of those things, actually. I want to actually do what you attempted to do, but do it in a more empowering way. Like, I wanted to rewire the generational pattern that she had, that was obviously passed down from her father, and who knows how much abuse her parents had, you know. So I just had this crossroads of, like, I could make that decision, or I can go actually take all of this and really use it as fuel for creating a different life for myself. So I ended up, like, going all in, working my ass off. I graduated college or high school early to go to college, and then I ended up actually dropping out of college specifically
Mhm.
because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And now that's what I am. I do my online business full time, and I'm really a stand for people owning their voice and their wealth because, a big part of the reason of all of that is because they definitely saw a woman who had so much potential and so much unresolved stuff. And just imagined like what would have happened if she did take those as her fuel for really creating a different life, right? So that's where I'm here today and why I stand for what I stand for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something like that you see commonly with addiction, especially, is the code. Like all addiction is rooted in codependency, which is typical for those who grew up in childhood abuse or a sticky childhood. And it really does like come down from the generations, and it's all learned behaviors. And we can make the choice, and it comes down to making the choice of doing differently and choosing a different life for us or for the next generation to break those generational cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you kind of touched on like not really remembering what flipped the switch for you, but like what would you say helped the most when you first decided to get out of that addiction?
It was definitely hearing stories. And I don't think I wasn't listening to podcasts or anything at the time, but what I was doing was I was
Yeah.
reading. I was in this independent study school for like this particular time where I was on drugs and I was just like heavily just wired out. But I was interestingly finding these books of people who had been addicted to things and have gone through really intense stuff, like selling themselves, all these different stuff. Which was also a part of my journey as well at the time. And I was reading this and reading how they've transpired through it and just totally changed their lives. There's one book called White Oleander for anyone who, has had a really crazy parent, mom, dad, or whatever it is. That book was so incredible. I had so many reflections from that book. I was like, whoa, this was like kind of the mom had went to jail because she actually murdered a boyfriend of hers from
Wow.
white oleander. Those are poisonous, so she put it in his tea because she was mad at him for like having an affair, something like that. And anyway, so she was like having these really manipulative letters being written to this 12-year-old girl who now was in foster care because her mom was in jail. And in foster care, she was like, had all of these confusing relationships with men and like met other men around the way, neighbors, all this really eerie similarities that I feel like a lot of people who also have experienced foster care, crazy parents, abuse, things with men can really, really relate to that book. There was that book. There was another one called, I think it was called Ice or something like that. Oh, I can't remember what those books were. But basically, it was any book that was about people who specifically were addicts or going through foster care or some kind of trauma. Because there's that hero's journey, like, oh my God, A Child Called It. I remember reading that one.
Yes, that one is a good one.
Yeah, like books like that I was just like, wow, like really gave me hope, really allowed me to see where the trajectory could go.
Yeah.
And so that was really like the biggest piece for me was to see other people's stories. And also while I was in foster care, I actually was in therapy from right when I got in, which was 12 years old is when I got in. I did run away for probably like 6 months to 9 months. So I didn't see a therapist during that time. But then when I got back, I came right back to see the same therapist. She was amazing. She introduced me to dream analysis, tarot, timeline therapy, mindfulness, meditation. She
You
introduced
got
me,
a good one.
oh my gosh, she introduced me to like yeah, astrology, art therapy. We did some. She was like Zen Buddhist. She used to travel around with the Grateful Dead when she was younger, you know. So
Wow.
she's like totally that hippie way, and she was not for
Yeah,
medications, but the foster care was into me
of
taking
course.
medication. But she kind of was like the bridge for my holistic healing journey.
Yeah.
Therapy was really, really huge. And I feel like a lot of people have this stigma about therapy that, like, which I definitely had at one point. I did get so blessed with this one woman, and then I kind of thought that was the only chance I would get for an epic therapist. Therapy is a regular part of my journey now. Even now to this day, therapy is a regular part of my journey because it's just that emotional hygiene that I
Mhm.
know that is so important to, to go back in and just do these rewiring and have this accountability and this space held for you to really process. And there's so
Mhm.
many different places to actually find the right one. I actually used psychology today for people who are in the States and maybe have like
Okay.
Medi-Cal or some kind of like insurance there, or even if you are looking to pay for a therapist or have resources for that. You can look on psychology today and you can actually find specific therapists by gender, by approach, by style. There's people that work with
Okay.
big trauma stuff or kid stuff or sexual abuse or LGBTQ or even EMDR, which was another one that I did, which was eye movement rapid desensitization or something like that. EMDR. That was like, it was like rewiring traumatic experiences because I had PTSD from so many things. There were so many things like that I would actually go into these like panic attacks where I would just kind of just go away from reality and think that I'm actually back to this space where the trauma actually stemmed from, and whatever triggered it had nothing to do with it, or maybe it was like a conflict with a partner or something. But they were really, really intense episodes that I was having, and they were uncontrollable, and I was uncontrollable at the time too. I would like white out and I would go crazy. So I would do these EMDR sessions with a therapist, and that was like freaking life changing. I definitely recommend people to seek that out. Be really mindful of making sure that they're a really credible source because it is a very deep process. But um, yeah, that's what I would say is like getting the therapist. I use psychology today for that. EMDR was a really big, powerful tool, and reading other people's stories from books. And now today we have social media and podcasts too. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Can you hear me? You're muted.
Right.
Oh.
There we go. Okay.
I
So I know you said you still use therapy, but what else do you think has helped further your healing journey now that like you've gotten some of the pieces picked up? And I know like healing is always layers and it's never completely
never,
never completely over.
never. No. A dance. I was actually going to fill that in. Is dance completely changed my life. I didn't grow up dancing. My mom was an incredible dancer, but like I said, anything she did, I was like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with it. So I actually was like always like I could never dance, or I'd be like embarrassed to move my body because like my mom did that. I was like, no, I'm not. That's not. Nuh-uh. And but when I actually I got introduced to fire dance when I actually was in AA. So when I graduated my high school early and went to college, I moved out and saved up for my first car and I drove away super proud of myself and went to college, and I went to AA because I actually was still binge drinking. I would never have called myself an alcoholic at the time because I never like got addicted to alcohol, but I was definitely a binge drinker and I didn't really know how to cope socially. So that's actually how I ended up going to AA because I knew that that had helped my mom for quite a long time, like in the end she ended up relapsing, and that was her own choice. But I grew up around AA and NA meetings for most of the time. So I was like, okay, well, that's where I can go and find new community. And I remember one day they wanted to go to this fire jam that was happening where these fire dancers were dancing at this cafe. And I had never seen anything like that before. And that was actually my last AA meeting, because I was like, I was starstruck, you know. I was from a small town, Clear Lake. I don't know if anybody here knows where the hell Clear Lake, California is. If you look it up, or if you know where that is, you'd probably be like, oh, wow. But it's a very small town. And so when I came to a little bit bigger of a city, Santa Rosa, and found fire dancers, my whole world changed. You know, I saw these people walking with confidence, people who were, yeah, some of them were really done up, but some of them were just like barefoot, dreads, you know, no makeup, just like didn't care. And they were just really beautiful and graceful and confident, and really just owning who they were and playing together and just like engaging together in this way that I had never experienced before. And I was like, oh my God, I want some of that. And so that was kind of the initiation to my dance journey, probably 10 years ago now. And dance completely saved my life. I ended up doing burlesque dance too. I kind of fell into that, where that was like the most liberating thing in my whole entire life. My God, you never really realize how much like sisterhood and like sensual or sexual empowerment trauma you have until you do burlesque. I swear. Like, that was the first time I ever surrounded myself with incredible, amazing, talented, beautiful women who left drama at the door. And your job was to just show up and like cheer each other on and embrace your sexy self. So that was super life-changing as well. And then I ended up going to some conscious music festivals too. Burning Man changed my life. Burning Man completely changed my life. That was like, you know, another place where I had already been introduced to fire dancing, but then all of a sudden I'm introduced to like all of these people living such a radically expressive, like just very in their own individuality, expanded consciousness space that, yeah, that's kind of where I found my family from there. You know, that's where I really started to recreate myself as like someone who could just create your life however you want, not caring how it looks, not caring how, you know, people who would actually listen, you know, like I went to authentic relating classes, and these classes where people were like hugging and listening to me. I've never experienced that my whole life. I was just like so scared of it. I still am like, yeah, partner dancing and all these super hippie intimate things kind of still get me a little, but it's been a really beautiful journey to step in and get out of my comfort zone in all of these different ways. But I will definitely say like the core of all of it is like with the dance, with my confidence and embracing who I am. And also I've had cathartic experiences dancing, where when I really just dance like no one's watching and I really just let it all out, there's some deep stuff that comes out of our muscles. I learned that we actually store trauma, especially in our hips, but definitely in our bodies and in our muscles, tissues. And, you know, I've experienced this in massages or dancing, where I'll just all of a sudden have a very cathartic cry where there's like some really deep pent up grief that I didn't even expect, you know? So that's been dance is a regular, that's my religion. It's like,
Yeah,
every
absolutely.
time.
Body keeps the score, and sometimes you gotta move it, whether that's dance, yoga, other forms of exercise, and really just get everything flowing again so that we can process those emotions. Because especially with childhood trauma, we've repressed it so much, stuffed it down because we had to. We couldn't safely process it during that time. That we gotta move in order to get it out. So
Yeah.
and really transform that power doing. So thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And I'm going to set up a resources document and put White Commander on there because that sounds like a great book resource for those to hear other find hope.
Yeah, the White Oleander book is amazing. Just don't watch the movie. The movie's horrible.
Don't watch the
Horrible.
like most things. Don't watch the movie. Read the book.
Yeah, the book is amazing. I'm probably, well, you know how when you read a book and then you watch the movie and but if it was the other way around, maybe watch the movie first and then it'll inspire you to read the book. But
Okay.
the book is very powerfully layered. Just, my gosh, almost every chapter is like, okay, the next foster home and like the next experience she had there. And yeah, it's just incredible.
Awesome. Thank you. And we will all see you later. Keep tuning in Thursdays at 8 p.m. Thanks.
Thank you.